Good morning, Southwest Family Fellowship. Good to see you guys. I know that video is a little bit different of a bumper video than you guys are used to. I know a lot of the ones that, especially the one for Romans, is upbeat, it's lively music, it kind of gets you going. This one's very serene, it's very quiet, kind of docile. But the reason I did that is kind of what we're talking about tonight. Not tonight, today. It's finding rest in God. So that's what we'll be talking about in our message today. I hope all of your summers are going well. Mine has been kind of crazy. I feel like since the middle of May, I haven't stopped, which has been a lot of fun. I'm not complaining. It's been a great time. But at the same time, I feel like just go, 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 constantly on the move. It's rather ironic that that's how my summer has been, because what I am talking about today is finding that rest in God, finding that time to pull back, slow down, and just stop a little bit. Up until this past week, I hadn't slept in my own bed for more than 2 to 3 nights in a row for upwards of 3 to 4 weeks. Between district council up in Dallas, Ethos summer camp at Camp Eternal, and then me flying up to Minnesota to help out at another summer camp, I was hardly ever at home. I was running from one place to the next. And it was a lot of fun. If you could throw up that picture behind it. That's a picture of everyone at Ethos Camp this summer. It was a lot of fun having the students to just come and connect, learn about God, play fun games, and hang out at the amazing campgrounds that are at Camp Eternal. But we didn't get much sleep. Every day I would wake up a little bit more tired, a little bit more sore. And by the time I got home, I'm like, wow, am I really going to go to another summer camp next week? So I kind of rested, recouped, but then Wednesday I hopped on a flight and I went up to Minnesota for another summer camp. So by the time I got home last Saturday at about midnight, between the district council, our summer camp, and Minnesota summer camp, my body was screaming at me. It was like, you need to rest. You need to slow down. You need to calm down. And I know a lot of you are looking at me like, well, you're young, you can handle it. But at the same time, it's still important for me to rest too. I feel like a lot of times we get so wrapped up in the busyness of life, our overscheduled calendars, running from one thing to the next, whether it's fun, whether it's work, whether it's an obligation. And we don't really take always the time to keep ourselves regulated, keep ourselves feeling rested and rejuvenated. One of my favorite things to do is play basketball. If I could, on my days off, whether it's a Saturday, Thursday, whatever day I'm off, I would go to the park, go to the gym, 9 a.m., get there, lace up my sneakers, have all my gear on, get my basketball out. Maybe there'd be 9 other guys there so we can play full court. And I would play from 9 a.m. till 10 p.m. I would just play all day long. Now, I wish I could do that. But after about 3-4 hours, even sometimes less than that, depending on the day, my body just can't take it anymore. I'm sore. I'm tired. I need to go ice. I need to take a break. I got to step away. I need to go eat some food. How many of you guys have been exercising and just in the middle you're like, wow, I can't do any more because I'm so hungry? But that's something I wish I could do. I wish I didn't have that limitation of my body. I wish I could play basketball all day because it's one of my favorite things. When I was fresh out of high school, just getting into college, just moved into a dorm downtown Minneapolis. There's a gym attached to my dorm room. Well, not my dorm room, my dorm building. That'd be really cool if it was attached to my dorm room. So all I had to do was just put on my clothes, grab my basketball, maybe walk 300-400 feet, and I was in the gym. So that whole first semester, I was like, I'm going to play basketball every day. So that's what I did for the first semester. 3, 4, 5 hours a night, I was playing basketball, making a lot of friends, having a great time. But as much as I could do that when I was 18, I don't know if I could keep that up anymore. Keeping that schedule, I mean, I don't even have the time to do that anymore because I don't live at the space and don't have the means of 9 guys that just want to play basketball for 4 hours a night. But we all realize that in the midst of that much physical activity, you need to rest, you need to ice, maybe sleep, maybe eat, and wait until the next day before you at least try to do more. And the biggest thing with like summer camps is you're doing that all day, every day, staying up till 2 or 3 in the morning. Then you're waking back up at 7 in the morning, doing it all day, every day, going back to sleep at 2 or 3 in the morning, doing it all day, every day. And then I came home for 2 days and went back and did it for another 3. So by the time I got back from that, I was like, wow, I know I'm 25, but that was a lot. I think it's safe to say we all realize that you can't exercise like that. Our bodies aren't made to do 8 hours of rigorous activity a day without any rest or any recovery. But when you take out that word exercise and you replace it with work and overexerting ourselves for a job, a paycheck, our business, making sure your kids are involved in every sport, club, camp, outing, event, practice, everything, we think that's normal. And it's great to be involved in things. It's great to be working for your business and doing well at your job. But we almost get into that mindset that we have to overexert ourselves to be successful. We have to overexert ourselves to be doing something, to be of value. And that overexertion model in the United States has become somewhat destructive and harmful. Christine Rowe, a journalist for BBC and New York Times, wrote an article titled, "How Overwork is Killing Us." And this was a great excerpt from it that I wanted to read to you. The study establishes that overwork is the single largest risk factor for occupational disease, accounting for roughly 1/3 of the burden of disease related to work. There are two major ways that overwork can reduce health and longevity. One is the biological toll of chronic stress, with an uptick in stress hormones leading to elevated blood pressure and cholesterol. And then there are the changes in behavior. Those logging long hours may be sleeping less, barely exercising, eating unhealthy foods, and smoking and drinking to cope. And there are particular reasons to worry about overwork both while we're still in the COVID-19 pandemic and then life thereafter. The pandemic has intensified some work stresses while bringing new forms of workplace exhaustion. And then one more quote from her. With the COVID pandemic, we have seen an increase in work from home, which has blurred that work-life balance among many individuals, which has led to disrupted sleep and exercise, and this has in turn caused an increase in risk for cardiovascular disease and stroke. How many of you know that when you're working at home and all it takes to get to your job is that 10 feet to the kitchen table or that 20 feet to your office, that it's sometimes hard to turn that off? You feel like, oh, well, I can just answer one more email. Oh, my boss called me, needs me to do it. I can open up the computer for 10 more minutes. But when every day becomes like that, and you don't set those boundaries and don't feel that time of rest, like valuing that time of rest and that time of self-care, it eventually hurts us. But now, this sermon is not going to be a deep dive into healthy work-life practices and why capitalism and exponential growth possibility is potentially harmful. Frankly, I don't know enough about those things. Maybe Anthony could do a sermon on that. He's probably done something similar, but that's not what I'm going to be getting into today. But one of the few things we can learn from this article is that the importance of rest, relaxation, self-care, and just slowing down are so important to us, to our health in more than just physical ways too. I did my college internship in Brussels, Belgium. So I got my bachelor's degree in pastoral studies. And for our internship, you have to serve in a church or a ministry. And I was like, well, a lot of my friends, a lot of people I know, they serve in their dad's church or their friend's church or their uncle's church or the church they're serving at in Minnesota where we were living. I was like, that could be easy, that could be fun. I could just hang out with people all summer, have a great time. But I was like, I kind of want to do something different. I want to think out of the box. I feel like my ministry is going to be a little bit more out of the box in my life, so I started looking into overseas opportunities. Back when I was 18, I went on a missions trip to Budapest, Hungary, and I met this family, amazing missionary family. Love their kids to death. I'm really close with them. One of their sons is actually in my wedding as an usher. And I was like, ever since that time, we had kind of flirted with the idea of me coming out to do an internship with them when the time came. So I was like, oh, this is the time. I'm going to call them. It's going to work out. I'm going to go to Budapest. It's going to be amazing. But I called them, and they're like, oh, we'd love to have you, but we're actually going to be home in the States itinerating during that time. I was like, shoot, I can't really do it at any other time. That was like my one summer block from like June to July that I could do. And so I started looking for different options. I asked my dad, we talked to some of his connections, and we got in contact with this guy who used to pastor 10 minutes from where I grew up. He was now a pastor for an international church in Brussels, Belgium. And so we called him and we're like, hey, do you think you could take on an intern for the summer? He's like, well, we haven't really had one in a couple of years, but that could be fun. So we kind of set it all up, got all my fundraising done, and I went to Brussels that summer. But at the same time that summer, I was also going to Israel for a month because it was one of my classes. It was a deep, intensive dive into biblical theology and understanding Hebrew geography and culture and understanding all the different things of the Old Testament, seeing the land. And so I flew straight from Tel Aviv to Brussels. So it was really interesting when I had to pack one checked bag that had clothes that I could wear in like the desert hot of Israel that I wouldn't burn, but then also pack a ton of clothes that I could wear in a church setting in a cold, very rainy area of Brussels. It was very interesting. My mom ended up sending me a box of clothes too because I couldn't pack it all in one, but it was very weird. Like when people in Israel saw my suitcase, they're like, why do you have all that stuff for here? I'm like, oh, that's for my next trip, don't worry. But it was really cool because my pastoral degree was able to take me all over the world. I went to Israel, I went to Belgium, and just being in Belgium, I got to go to a bunch of countries, and then multiple missions trips from the school I got to go on to different parts of the world. But I had a certain amount of hours that I had to fill to meet the requirements for my internship. And I was like, well, the way they do internships in the US is they kind of just work you to the bone from like 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. every day. You're at the church, you're vacuuming, you're cleaning toilets, you're a part of every ministry, you're at every event, you're doing everything. So I'm like, oh, I'll fill that easy, even though it's only a month. But by the time I got to Brussels and I kind of laid out to the pastor my idea of like, oh, this is how we're going to fill all my hours, he looks at me, he's like, Connor, that's not how it works here in Belgium. Our average work week is 32 hours. If we tried working you more than 32 hours as the unpaid intern, they would come for my head. They would think we're abusing you, manipulating you. They'd be like, wow, this poor American, they brought him over just to work him like a slave. So he's like, that's not going to work. So I was like, oh, well. I also knew that in my internship I could use hours to write my papers for the class and read books on leadership and personal leadership development and just find creative ways to grow and learn in my pastoral ministry. So that's kind of what I had to do. It was a little different because I had a lot more downtime than I thought. And one of the weird things about Brussels is it's a very, very rainy city. Like, think Seattle. I was there for 35 days, and 34 of them it poured. So I couldn't even walk outside. It was beautiful, but I was like, I'm not going to get drenched just walking outside. That's not enjoyable. But it was really cool to see how they value that work-life home balance. They value that time to go be with your family, to enjoy life. It's not all about a paycheck. It's not all about working yourself to the bone. And it was very interesting because like even their grocery stores and restaurants would close by 6, 7 p.m. every day. So if you didn't go right after work, you were out of luck. You had to try it again tomorrow. It was an awesome time to learn and grow and be a part of something that was just so different from what I was used to here. The building I was staying in there was actually like the housing center of multiple ministries for Europe. So like Convoy of Hope Europe was out of that building, Breaking Chains Network, which helps get women out of sex trafficking, and then PEF and PEFI, which is their Pentecostal European Fellowships that just kind of covers the whole continent. So I got to do a lot of outreaches with them. I got to go to France and work in a refugee camp. This is about the time of the Syrian refugee crisis. So I got to go in, feet on the ground, feeding people, giving them meals, making sure they were doing okay. Those refugee camps, it was sad. Like, it wasn't great living conditions, but that was better than where they were coming from. So they were still coming. And like I said, this was the same summer I was in Israel. So one of the things I also got to learn there is how in Israel they call it Shabbat, which is their Hebrew word for Sabbath. So every Friday, about dinner time till dinner time on Saturday, all the Hebrew people would rest, the Jewish people. They'd rest, they wouldn't work, it would time to hang out with family, they wouldn't even cook meals, They would make sure they cooked enough Friday night to last them for the entire day so that they could just rest, take a break, step back. And it was just cool to be in both of those different countries and both those different cultures where they value rest and relaxation and self-care in such a different way than we necessarily do here. Now, I know that the U.S. is very different from Belgium and Israel, and I'm not trying to say we should be like them, because that just won't work. But I do think we can learn something about valuing rest, self-care, and that work-life home balance. Life is starting to get back to what we would call normal from before COVID, little by little. But how many of you felt like you were always busy before COVID? You were always running from one practice, one event, one thing to the next. Now, I'm sure there's some of you that enjoyed that. You liked that. You liked having your schedule full of doing all these different things. But it's also good to take a break. It's not always the worst thing to just step back, slow down, and rest. That's one of the lessons I've learned in COVID. It's allowed me to slow down, sit, have more intentional conversations with family, with friends, with loved ones, to sleep a bit more. My sleep habits have definitely gotten better in COVID. I've been able to read more, something that I was never really good at, but it's become something that I'm trying to be better at. And just enjoy more, honestly. Being busy is great and all, but when you start to pull back and start to rest, you start to realize all the things you were missing out on by being so invested in everything that you weren't as invested in some of the more crucial things. Did you guys know that even Jesus rested and practiced self-care? Now, I recognize that some of you might hear the term self-care and think about it in completely different terms. For some, it might be self-explanatory. You might think, yeah, self-care is really important. It's about taking care of myself, making sure I'm doing okay, checking in on myself. But for others, you might think of it and think, self-care. That sounds very me-focused. It's all about me, myself, and I. It's a little bit selfish. And still for others, you might be thinking, I just want to learn more about that. Like, what does that fully mean? I know it's kind of a simple term, self-care, but it's a more complex thing as well. Self-care is any deliberate action we take to support our own mental, physical, or emotional health and well-being. Now, I realize that self-care has become sort of a gimmick, especially on social media. It's been used to sell you some things that you probably honestly don't really need. And I'm going to raise my hand and say I've bought them too. So I'm not attacking you. I'm saying I buy them too. Like, my family loves these. You guys seen these plush sweatshirts that are made out of like blanket material that you sit on the couch with and it feels like you're just like it's not a Snuggie, but it's like a heavy blanket sweatshirt. Like, so many people in my family own these. I'm like, why? We have 1 million blankets and we're in Texas. Like, you can only wear that for maybe like 3 hours in the year. But I also have to step back and realize I used to have a blanket addiction. There's like maybe a chance I need to sign up for Blankets Anonymous, because there was a point in my life where any chance I get, I would buy a new blanket. Every Christmas I'd be like, Mom, can you get me a new plush blanket? I just love like being wrapped up in them. And that was great in the north when I was dealing with -30 winters and I could have 5 or 6 blankets on me. But now here in Texas, they're pretty much useless. They're all too thick. By the middle of the night, I kick them off, and they're just piled up on my bed. I'm like, I don't know what to do with these. Or how many of you guys have seen those like slippers where they're like, oh, you're supposed to be like walking on clouds on these slippers. They feel like a little cloud. They don't feel like a cloud. They feel like a plush like pillow, but not a cloud. They're pretty nice. My fiance has some. I've worn them. They're nice, but they're not a cloud. But marketing people really know how to sell you on that self-care terminology. They know the strategy to get you to buy stuff. But the truth is, self-care is really not that complicated. It's complicated in how it's misunderstood and it's difficult to practice, but it's not always that difficult to understand. Taking time away to hike a trail or read a book or shoot some hoops, or make some music might be just the thing that you need to take care of yourself. Jesus valued self-care and resting and breaks more than most of us, honestly. But he also utilized those things so that he could continue to do the ministry he was doing. If he didn't take those intentional times to rest, to slow down, to break, he wouldn't have been able to continue to love on people, serve people, heal people, see thousands of people a day. I mean, just think about us. We see like 5 or 6 coworkers in a day, and they say 1 or 2 wrong things, and we're done with people for the day. But Jesus was around thousands and thousands of people every day, pulling at his robe. Jesus, can you heal me? Jesus, can I talk to you? Jesus, can I do this? And none of that's wrong, because I'd be doing the same thing. I'd be fighting everyone off to get my time with Jesus. But at the same time, he was human. He was God, but he came in the form of humanity. So he feels the same things we do in the form of just being overwhelmed by people and just that need to refill his tank. He did this all so that he wouldn't burn out. So let's dive into Mark 1, where we see an instance of this. So with it being Mark 1, it's the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So this is just kind of the background for this story. So Mark 1, 32 through 39. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons. And the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found them, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out the demons. After a long day of ministry and helping people and serving people, Jesus made it a priority to wake up early while it was dark and to go find a place of solitude. He found a place to rest, to recoup, and to spend time in the presence of God. Like I said, he had been in the midst of a ton of people. He was drained. His emotional, physical, spiritual tanks were running on E. He needed that renewal. His humanity needed that renewal. So he spent that time of solitude and rest with God to refill his tank so he could keep going on and do ministry. And what was so important about him finding that place of solitude was a place of no distractions, no deterrents. He could focus solely on God. Because wherever Jesus went, if there was at least one person around him, they were trying to get his attention. They were trying to talk to him. They were trying to show him something, have him do something. He needed that time of solitude to get close with God. How often do we look at those times of solitude as a place of like renewal, of peace, of comfort? I know for me, there's been a lot of times in my life where I've looked at it as kind of a scary thing. You're in a quiet place, just you, your thoughts, and God. Everything, you feel like everything is looking at you. You're feeling everything. It can be awkward. It can be weird, even a bit cringy. But those peaceful, quiet moments without distraction are some of the most important times where we can connect with God in a meaningful way, because it's just him and us. We can talk to him, we can spend time with him, we can rest with him. Jesus knew he needed that alone time to just take a breath and allow himself to rest and be rejuvenated so that he could continue to do more ministry and to love more people. And that leads us into the first point. Find a place where you can rest with God. Whether it's a room in your house where you can shut the door and just be alone with God, or it's a park bench by your work, or it's a walking trail where you have headphones in and you're just walking with God, talking with God. I'd encourage you to find a place where you can just have those alone times with God, those times of solitude, and practice that self-care. Just a place where you can be uninterrupted. Because I know a lot of times you're like, well, I'll do it in the living room. But then like 3 minutes in, you have your daughter asking you this one thing, and then your son asking you this one thing, and then your husband asking you this one thing, and then the dog's jumping on you, and you hear sirens outside, and by the time you get through it, you're like, oh, I didn't actually do anything. And that's not wrong. Like, you were trying. and I commend you for that. But at the same time, if you can find that place where you maybe won't have as many distractions, it'll allow you to have that more intentional alone time and self-care. And that's what happened in this story with Jesus. He had to get away. He had to wake up early before anyone was awake, had to go find that solitude place in the wilderness. Because as we read in the story, as soon as the disciples woke up, Simon and his companions went and they hunted for him. Hunted is a strong word, meaning they were actively seeking out for him. But by the time they found him, he had gotten enough time to rest and recoup that he was ready to go do more ministry. Now, I don't know what things help you guys relax or recharge. I know I say you guys a lot. It's y'all down here. I got to get used to that. Y'all. Help you relax, recharge, or rest. The truth is that the modes of self-care can look different for all of us. So I'm not going to prescribe a certain method, but I'll just lay out a few examples, and maybe you can kind of learn from that or use them or just kind of get an idea. For Jesus, it was going to a deserted place and praying. For me, I tend to like to go, I already talked about how I love basketball, but I also love to go just to a gym, put in headphones, shoot around at a hoop. I don't go fast. I don't try to overexert myself. These times are more for, I just have my music in, I'm shooting around, I'm talking to God. Some of the times I can think the clearest, I can talk to God the easiest, and there are some of the times that are the most integral to my health and my well-being. Because mental health is extremely important. Just as much as physical health, spiritual health, we got to make sure our minds are healthy as well. And that needs to be tended to more through self-care, support, and talking to others. It's really, really cool that we live in a time where mental health is prioritized more and the stigma has gone down. And it's okay to go see a counselor. It's okay to go to therapy. There might still be some people that look at you and be like, oh, you go to therapy? And you just tell those people, yeah, probably. It's a thing that helps us. It's not a sign of weakness. It's pouring into your self-care. Another thing is taking mental health days. Those have become encouraged. It's not just when you're sick with a cold or a flu or COVID. It's okay to take mental health days where you just need to rest, recharge, and be ready for the rest of what life and your work has for you. I know I take mental health days every so often just to reset myself, recharge. I just want you guys to know you don't need to feel bad about taking care of yourself. That doesn't mean I give you a free pass to just neglect your family or just be like, it's my rest day, I can't do that. You know, because that could happen. And even with Shy and I, we're not married yet, but there's times where, oh, I'm resting, I can't do that. Or like her favorite thing is, the dog's on my lap, I can't do that for you right now. I'm like, okay, but the dog's on my lap and you still ask me to do it. Whatever. I'm not resentful, I'm really not. It's more of a funny thing. But if you need to take a mental health day, go do that. If you need to go see a counselor, go do that. If you need to go on a vacation, don't do it right now. Go ask your boss for it off, get it approved. Don't just leave. I'm not saying to just leave, but get that approved and go do that. If you need to go take some solitude with God, do that. Whatever it is you need to do, do that. Because the more you take care of yourself, it just naturally allows you to love others more, better as well. Because then that love that God repours into you, flows out of you more easily and normal. Can I tell you guys a secret? It's not really a secret, but yeah, can I? Is that okay? Do you guys know that God didn't put us on this earth from the age of 18 until we die to burn out? He doesn't want us to just be on this earth and just grind to the bone every day, come home so tired that we can't even do anything, we just fall asleep, that we don't have any energy to pour into relationships, that we don't have any time to pour into community. He wants us to enjoy life. He wants us to enjoy it with him. And that leads us into the second point, which is intentionally invest in your self-care. Anthony and I's Sabbaths are on Thursdays. Those are the days we don't do any work. We don't check emails. We don't take calls. We don't schedule any appointments, any tasks. We, as best to our ability, refrain to think about anything with church, which might sound, you might be like, wow, that's kind of weird. But That's our way to recharge. It's our way to pour into our own health and make sure that we don't burn out, that we find times to just enjoy life outside of just the job. Because ministry is amazing, it's awesome, it's great to serve you and love on the congregation, but at the same time, we need to make sure we're doing okay. So one thing I know that Anthony does, I'll speak for Anthony first, is he uses that Thursday to really pour into his relationship with Deanna and his kids. So a lot of times they'll go down to the river in downtown Austin, they'll go paddleboarding, they'll go for a walk, they'll try a new restaurant. He'll also spend intentional time with his kids if they're around on that day. It's a great time for him to pour in that self-care of sowing into his family and just building those relationships up. Because as he does that, he enjoys that. He loves them. It enriches him. It fills him up with joy. And I know for like me, Shai and I, Thursday nights are our date night. So one of our favorite places to go is Mozart's downtown, right on the river. One of the cool things is now that COVID's opening up, things like ACL is coming back and music is coming back. So at Mozart's a couple of times we've heard live music while getting coffee and pastries. And that's a really fun time for us to just pour into each other, build up that relationship, and that's one of the biggest methods of self-care in my life as well, as those Thursday night date nights. Jesus practiced self-care and rest in a lot of different ways also. In Mark 4:35-40, Jesus is on a boat after a long day of ministry when he's taking a nap because he's tired. He needs to rest. And while he's taking that nap, a storm comes, a nasty storm on the Sea of Galilee. And his disciples are like, how is he sleeping? One, how is he sleeping through this? And two, why is he sleeping? We're all going to die. We need him. Jesus, wake up. And Jesus is like, why are you freaking out? And he literally comes straight up the stairs out to the top of the boat. He looks at the storm and he says, be still. And I think when I read that, it's like being still to the storm, but the way I read it too is like be still, like how he was taking a nap, he was telling the disciples to be still, like don't worry, rest, calm, trust me. Another example is in Mark 14 when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's praying, he's having that intentional time with God. But right after this, he knows what's coming. He knows Judas is about to betray him. He knows he's going to be beaten, abused, put on the cross. How many of you, if you knew you were going to be brutally murdered in like a couple days, would take intentional time to just rest and spend time with God? It'd be hard, right? You'd be like, well, I'm going to try my darndest to not get killed. I'm going to try to run. I'm going to flee. I'm going to prepare myself. I'm going to take some jujitsu. I'm going to be able to fight them. I don't know if our first inclination would be like, I'm going to get down on my knees and I'm going to pray. I'm going to have time with God. Even God rested after creation. On the seventh day, he rested. He saw that it was good. And that was the first instance of the Sabbath. And then just one more example is when Jesus fed the 5,000 in Mark 6 near Bethsaida. Jesus and the disciples had been out all day again. It's a recurring theme. He's been out all day doing ministry. He's tired, needs to rest. And he tells the disciples, he's like, hey, we're going to go find some solitude. Let's go. So in verses 31 and 32, he says to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. I think it's so cool to learn and know that we have a God and Jesus who values and cares about self-care and rest and pouring back into ourselves. He cares about our mental, physical, spiritual health. We're not just some pawns that he throws into the sea and kicks into a fire and we're just for his amusement. He cares about us. He loves us. And those things, those times of rest, those times where we can find that renewal, allow us to do more and to love more people and to be rejuvenated. And that's something he was trying to instill that value in his disciples. Hey, you need to rest. You need to provide times of just rejuvenation and self-care. My hope today is that we will find inspiration from Jesus on the value of self-care and that practice. It allows us to continue doing what we're doing and do it healthily. we know we can push through. There's times where I unconsciously I'm like, oh, I've preached before. I know I'm still like nervous. I'm getting used to it. So I'm not going to use preaching. Scratch that. Maybe something like serving in a certain area, like maybe greeting. Oh, I've greeted a million times. I don't need to really pray or prepare myself or have God in that. I can do that without God. I don't necessarily consciously be like, oh, I'm going to keep God out of this. But when I don't consciously put him in it, it's the same thing, isn't it? And that sometimes, if I keep trying to do that too long, when I was in youth ministry up in Minnesota, it was like a system. We were part of a very large youth group. We had a very good system. We knew how to do it. We could do it in our sleep. So there were times where we could do it without really preparing. We could do it, just show up that day, have it ready, do it, it'd be okay. But how much better could it be if we actually brought God into that? Because eventually you're going to run out of that. You're going to run out of your own level of ability. One other interesting aspect of these occurrences in Mark that we just laid out is explained by William L. Lane in his commentary on the Gospel of Mark. In Mark's Gospel, Jesus is seen in prayer only 3 times. At the beginning of the account, when his ministry is being defined, which is the story we covered today. In the middle, after the feeding of the 5,000, which we just talked about. And near the end, when he's praying in Gethsemane, which is, we also just laid that out. These 3 occasions have the character of a critical moment. The setting for Jesus' prayer in each instance is night and solitude. These times of solitude allowed Jesus to recoup. It allowed him to rest. It allowed him to renew his identity in God. Even though he was God, him taking on the form of humanity, he needed to still bear that image of God. He still needed that time to be exposed to God, that time to rest in God. R. Kent Hughes eloquently paints a picture of how prayer and time talking to God renews our identity and image of God. He says, E. Stanley Jones once described prayer as a time exposure to God. He used the analogy of his life being like a photographic plate, which when exposed to God, progressively bore the image of God in keeping with the length of exposure. Hughes also talks about how Jesus didn't necessarily have to do this in his God-like state, but in the same time, his humanity needed to soak in God's presence and be renewed by him. Jesus as a human needed that exposure time with God. He needed that prayer time. He needed that rest time. God doesn't need to rest, but us as humans need to rest. So when Jesus as a human came, he needed to rest. And he valued that rest, that self-care, and it helped his ministry. I mean, if it's good enough for Jesus, I think it's good enough for me, right? Good enough for all of us. But seriously, if the Savior of the world, the embodiment of God's love, got away from the commotion of life to care for his well-being and be reminded of his identity in God, it's probably a good idea. And that leads us into the third point. Renew your identity in that rest with God. We must find our identity in God's unconditional love and how he values us. When we find our value and our identity in anything else, it pulls us away from God, and eventually it won't keep us sustained. We'll feel bad, we'll feel hurt, we'll feel broken. But when we're connected to that power and majesty of God and connected to that unconditional love that loves us just because, we're rooted in such a strong identity, such a strong exposure to God, that it allows us to continue doing what we're doing at such a high level. Henry Nouwen is a very influential spiritual writer who valued rest, self-care, solitude very much. He was a Catholic priest from the Netherlands who went on to teach at Notre Dame, Harvard, and Yale. So pretty successful places. Those are pretty elite universities. But even amidst all of that success, Nouwen got to the point where he was like, this doesn't feel uplifting to me. I don't feel joyful. I don't feel successful, even though most of us would look at that and be like, that is success. He had this profound sense of loneliness. So after taking a sabbatical where he did some deep soul searching, he realized, I need to step away. I need to take a pause on my successful life, my crazy busy life, and I'm going to go and I'm going to serve in a residential community that serves people with intellectual disabilities. And that's where he found his rest and his renewal. That's where he found his renewal of his purpose. He found his strength again. He found joy again. These people with disabilities had so much joy, and it radiated out of them that it impacted him in a profound way. In his book, Out of Solitude, he explores this passage in Mark we went over, in Mark 1. This scripture is pretty action-packed. It has healings, casting out of demons, nagging disciples, traveling, and teaching. But right in the middle of this text, there's a break from the action. And in verse 35 it says, "In the morning, while it was still very dark, Jesus got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed." Now it says this about that quiet moment for Jesus. "In the center of breathless activities, we hear a restful breathing. Surrounded by hours of moving, we find a moment of quiet stillness. In the heart of much involvement, there are words of withdrawal. In the midst of action, there is contemplation. And after much togetherness, there is solitude." The more I read this nearly silent sentence locked in between the loud words of action, the more I have the sense that the secret of Jesus' ministry is hidden in that lonely place where he went to pray early in the morning, long before dawn. What a beautiful representation of that quiet moment Jesus had with God. I think it paints a pretty picture of how God wants us to rest, how he wants us to practice that self-care. He wants us to find that quiet or secluded spot to just sit with him, enjoy life with him, take a breath. I think too often as Christians we feel like our relationship with God requires us to do something. It requires us to do this, requires us to do that. I need to read my Bible. I need to pray. I need to serve. I need to do all these things. And that's all great. And those are things that we should do out of the embodiment of the love that he pours out through us. But when we feel like that's our entire identity, that's not good either. Because sometimes God's simply just asking you, just saying, "Hey, Roger, come sit with me. Just enjoy life with me. Just take a break. I know your job at the emergency management systems is crazy this whole year. Just come sit with me. Rest." And maybe that's the exact thing that Roger's like, "Ooh, thanks, God." I tried to mimic Roger. I'm not the greatest at it, but ooh, yeah, thanks, God. But it's a marvelous thing when we can take that time, when we can, maybe something you love is just taking a walk in nature, just enjoying the beauty around you. But then some of you might hear that and you'd be like, "Ew, a walk in nature? That's hot. There's bugs. I have to get up." So maybe your thing is sitting in your favorite chair. Maybe your favorite thing is you got this lazy boy in your house, doesn't provide any back support. You just slouch in that thing when you get back from work, and maybe that's where you can meet God. I'd say wherever it is, just find a place where you can invite God into your life, where you can rest, where you can enjoy life with him. It becomes a really beautiful thing. Self-care looks different for all of us. But no matter what it is, whether it's reading a book, walking in the mall, going for a run, or trying out a new coffee place, honest confession, Shai and I have tried out almost every coffee shop in Austin since we moved here because she is a coffee addict, and it's a lot of fun. But we'll have to branch out soon because that's one of our favorite things to do. But when you can bring God into those moments of self-care and find rest with him, it really becomes an impactful thing. Now, some of you might be thinking, "Connor, we're just getting out of COVID. It's been super lonely. We haven't been able to go places for holidays, haven't been able to see people. It's just been kind of a sad time at times. So why in the world are we talking about solitude right now?" And I'm like, well, it's still important. It's still a valuable thing that we need to remember. Because as we get back into more and more in-person things, as you get back to your schedule being filled up more, as you're taking your kids everywhere and doing all these things, it's still so important for us to find that time to step back, slow down, rest in God, and find that renewal. Doing a ton of activities isn't wrong. Being super busy isn't always wrong. We have great intentions. We want to accomplish a lot of great things. It's a great time. But I still want us to make sure that we have times of solitude, times of prayer. When we value and make that self-care important and a priority, we won't lose ourselves in the craziness and busyness of life. Another quote from Out of Solitude Now and said, "Somewhere we know that without a lonely place, our lives are in danger. Somewhere we know that without silence, words lose their meaning. That without listening, speaking no longer heals. That without distance, closeness cannot cure. Somewhere we know that without a lonely place, our actions quickly become empty gestures. The careful balance between silence and words, withdrawal and involvement, distance and closeness, solitude and community forms the basis of the Christian life." When Jesus got away from the craziness of the crowds and the people and found that time to pray and be in that quiet place, we don't necessarily know what he prayed for or how he prayed, but we know that's the epitome of how he kept going. It renewed him. It allowed him to be restored and to love on more people. He had that exposure time with God, that our Kent Hughes quote of, "Prayer is a time exposure to God." I love that. That's such a beautiful portrayal of what prayer is. All those things are self-care. Like we said earlier, self-care can be done in a number of different ways. Some of you like to garden and get your hands in the dirt. Some like to ride a horse. Some like to go for a walk. For others of you, it could be trying that new barbecue place with your friends. Self-care is meant to be different for each one of us. And I know I keep using things where it involves other people. Self-care can also include other people, even though it says self-care. But that's the cool thing, because self-care is self-care. It's not all of us care. It's not group care. It's not average human care. It's about where you find rest and where you can reset and hopefully where you can connect with God. At the heart of self-care is a retreat into our identity as someone who is unconditionally loved just for being us. It's a retreat into that place where we are loved just because, not because of what we do or don't do. And when we're reminded of that fact that God loves us just because, it allows us to find that renewal. And it allows us to wholeheartedly be embodied by that love and for that to pour out and allow us to love our neighbors as ourselves. In our scripture today, we heard about the powerful actions of healing people, casting out demons, teaching, and going around. As followers of Jesus, we are called to serve. We are called to love. We are called to do good. But our identity is not found in that loving, that serving, or that doing good. It is found in God and how he unconditionally loves us. I know I keep saying that, but that's so important to our identity, so important to our walk with God, understanding that. Where our identity comes from is that unconditional love. When we realize that we're loved simply for being us, that's when we can retreat to God and practice that self-care. The practice of self-care is super, super important in our success-oriented and fast-paced world. Because most of your job places or workplaces, maybe not, maybe some, there's some good businesses that really pound that home, but at the same time, there's a lot that don't. They just want you to work long hours, provide good results, and they don't really care if you're healthy or doing well. So one of the ways my family does self-care is we love to go on vacations. And one of our favorite spots is Disney World. We are definitely a Disney family. I know there's a lot of people that kind of mock like Disney adults. I guess I'd be considered a Disney adult now. But a lot of us are in ministry. A lot of us are constantly loving on people, serving people, around people. So this time when we go on vacations and we can just hang out as a family and bond and just step back and relax and hang out there, it's a great time of self-care. It's a great time of rest. It's a great time of renewal. Now, I'm 25, and I don't know the exact number, but I know for a fact that I've at least been to Disney at least once for every year I've been alive, if not more. So we're like a Disney family. Not just like I've been like 4 or 5 times, like it's a lot. I have a nephew that lives there, he works there. Our family has a couple like rental houses down there, so we go to Florida a lot. Some of you may hear Disney and think, how in the world is that a place of rest for you, Connor? There's hundreds of thousands of people, it's hot, there's long lines, expensive activities. But at the end of the day, Disney does a great job. They do a great job of making you feel special. They do a great job of anybody that comes in to their park, their hotel, their resorts, cruises, stores. They try and strive to make it so that you have a great time. For some of you, all you can think about though is like, wow, I just spent that much at Disney? I know, that's hard. It's not cheap. Their mottos are the happiest place on earth, where dreams come true, and the most magical place on earth. Those are pretty bold claims. But for a lot of the parts, they back it up. And one of the ways they do this is they refer to each and every one of their customers as guests. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal to refer to them as guests versus customers. But just think, do you invite customers into your house to come hang out with you, or do you invite guests? I know Disney isn't really a house, but they embody that model of making you feel special, making you feel like you're important. They want to get to know you, make sure you have a good time, make lasting memories. You make lasting memories with guests. I've been reading Disney's book, Be Our Guest. It's their customer service model. It's really interesting to deep dive into how they do business and how they make this multi-billion, trillion-dollar business that is just founded on that principle of making people feel special, making them have lasting memories and have a good time. Part of why my family loves Disney so much is because we make those lasting memories. We have those times where we bond as a family. Whether it's in a park, riding a ride, or watching a show, I love the Indiana Jones show, or sitting by the pool reading. We walk away from Disney feeling like we had a good time as a family. We stepped away from our busy lives, and we were able to just rest. We don't walk away feeling like we spent too much money. Like I said, it's not cheap, but we don't feel that. Or it was too hot, or too many people. We just remember the lasting memories, and at a place where they do so well to make it a fun experience for all ages. It's a place of self-care because we are able to take a break from our work lives. We're able to rest, and we're able to bond as a family. Now, Disney World might not be the best place to find solitude. There's a million distractions. Everywhere you go, there's something new to do. But they, like I said, do a great job of making you feel special. And they make you feel like a guest and that you're worth pouring time into. At the heart of self-care is a retreat into our core identity as someone who is loved, unconditionally loved, just because of who we are. Not as a result of what we do or don't do. And this is what Jesus did too. He practiced self-care. He got away from the commotion of life to take care of his well-being. And when we do this, when we take that time to rest and recoup and practice self-care, it allows us to love ourselves more, and that in effect allows us to have a higher capacity to love others and do what we're doing to a higher level. Now, as we are entering the summer and COVID restrictions go away a bit more, and busyness of life returns little by little, it is key that we understand and know where our identity comes from and know where we can find that rest. Jesus died on the cross for us so we could be freed from our sin, so we could have that relationship with him forever, so we could find that rest in him forever, where we could find that love, feel that hope, feel that peace. It's in these times of rest, solitude, and self-care that we can have that renewal of identity, that renewal of spirit, with someone who just desires so desperately to have a relationship with us. One more quote from Nouwen. In solitude, we can discover in the center of our own self that we are not what we can conquer, but what is given to us. In solitude, we can listen to the voice of the one who spoke to us before we could speak a word, who healed us before we could make any gesture to help, who set us free long before we could free others, and who loved us long before we could give love to anyone. God wants those quiet times with us, those times of solitude and rest. When our lives are filled with activities, running from one place to the next, driving around town. It's so much harder to stay in exposure with God in that time of rest and renewal and just relationship. And when we lack that, we separate ourselves from that source of love and that source of strength. So I just have 2 questions for you guys today. 1, how will you practice self-care? And 2, will you find times of solitude to rest and find a renewal of your spirit and identity in God's unconditional love? I would encourage you, even as things open up back here, that you would make it a conscious effort to slow down. Find those times of rest. Practice self-care. Get that help. When we can find that renewal of our spirit by being in exposure with God, it allows us to do more than we could ever do on our own anyways. So just as a reminder, as we close out today, 3 things. 1, find a place where you can rest with God. 2, intentionally invest in your self-care. And 3, renew your identity in that rest with God. Let's pray. God, I just thank you that you're a God who just really does so desperately want a relationship with us. You want to enjoy life with us. You want to experience it with us. You want us to just slow down and enjoy these moments with you. You didn't create us to just from 18 to death burn out. You didn't create us to just never have times to enjoy life and to enjoy community, enjoy family, enjoy the things that you've created. Most of the time you're just like, hey, look at these beautiful things I've created. Look at these magnificent things that are here for you to enjoy. Come enjoy them with me. Come sit with me. Come walk with me. I thank you that you've given us this community, God, where we can come and learn together, where we can grow together, where we can be encouraged by each other, where we can learn how to rest, we can learn how to find our identity in you, where we can learn that we're loved just because. I thank you that we have communities all across the globe that just push us closer to you, push us towards learning more and more about you and just being loved by you. I just pray that as we go this week and thereafter, that we just find a place where we can rest with you, God. We intentionally invest in our self-care, and that we renew our identity in that rest with you, in that unconditional love. I thank you for what you're doing in our lives, God. In your name I pray. Amen. Well, it was so great to see all of you this week. Thank you so much for coming to church. Pastor Anthony is wrapping up his vacation in Maine in the Northeast. He's been having a lot of fun hiking and just seeing all the different things, but he's so excited to be back with you guys next week. And I know you guys are so excited. We're diving back into Romans. We've got a few more left of that. It's getting close. It's getting close, guys. We're almost to a new series. It's not going to go till 2022. But I've loved it. I don't know about you guys, but I've loved it. The deep dive into Romans, just learning all that there is to uncover in the theology and just the different things in there. But he's so excited to see you guys and be back with you. So I'd encourage you to come back next week. And like we said earlier, next week is July 4th. So there will only be one service. So you guys are here at 11, so come back at 11. If you come back at 9, well, I told this to 9 o'clock. Well, maybe that's your time of rest. You can come just sit in this room. You can hang out. We'll have some music maybe playing. You can be quiet. But there won't be any service. It'll only be 11 next week. So we'd love to have you join for that. And this is the time of the service where we do offering and tithes. So there's 5 ways to give. There's mail. You can put in the bucket, text, online, and the app are the different 5 ways. So we thank you so much for all your giving. You guys have been super faithful through COVID and through it all. It allows us to, we've been able to do way more with outreaches and providing money for missionaries to do work across the world and in our Chi Alpha ministries. You also allow us to keep this room super cold during the summer. I know some of you might hate that, but I love it, because if it was any warmer, I would be melting right now. So I thank you that you allow us to keep the lights on, keeps the air conditioning going, and just allow us to keep doing what we're doing here. You guys have been so faithful. So I know Anthony has his 3 things that he always tells you every week, but I always like to switch it up. I don't want to just do what he does. That's his thing. It's amazing. I'm not trying to take away from it. But as you go this week, Find a place where you can rest with God. Intentionally invest in your self-care and renew your identity in that rest with God. Have a blessed week.